Good afternoon, everyone. I am Linda Miller, the president of Friends of Historic Second Church, and we are delighted to have you here today as we announce our biggest restoration project yet, the conservation of the massive Tree of Life mural and all the surrounding artwork on the west side of the sanctuary. This is an important project as it is the first thing that visitors see when entering the sanctuary, and it's the largest piece of art in the collection. Why are we doing this now, you might ask? Well, after 118 years, a lot of dirt has accumulated, a lot of coal dust has accumulated, and the effects of 118 years have had a destabilizing effect on the materials beneath the mural and the other artwork. It's in great need of conservation. Our speaker today is Bill Tyre, who will provide you with the details of all of the elements of the project.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. It's my pleasure to be here today. Before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge both Martin Chung and James Caulfield, both of whom are very talented photographers, and we'll be seeing some of the wonderful detail shots that they have taken of the various elements of the Tree of Life and surrounding elements. So, of course, our story begins on March 8th, 1900, exactly 122 years ago this week, when a devastating fire destroyed the sanctuary of Second Presbyterian Church. Howard Van Doren Shaw, the well-known architect and lifelong member of the church, was asked to redesign the space. He spent much of that summer traveling in England, visiting arts and crafts churches, and by the fall had completed his designs for the space. We are going to be looking at the chancel wall, or the west wall of the church. And one of the things I really like about this project is that this particular portion of the church probably expresses better than any other the concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is a German term that means total work of art. Because as we will see, what is included here, both the mural and surrounding elements, is actually the work of 6 different craftsmen, all working under Shaw's vision and working very well together to bring it all together as a single unified whole. The other thing that really brings these elements together is the idea of these repetitious elements that are used in the various materials. So we will see the angel, the pomegranate, the grapevine, and the crown, which are all seen throughout the sanctuary. The examples that I show here all actually come from the chancel wall and are all part of the current project. So of course, we start by looking at the mural itself, the work of the artist Frederic Bartlett. Bartlett was born in Chicago in 1873 and lived for many years just a matter of blocks from Second Presbyterian. Next year will be his 150th anniversary of the birth, and so it's a wonderful time to get the project underway to celebrate this significant artist. Following the World's Columbian Exposition, Bartlett traveled off to Europe as one of the first Americans that was admitted to the Royal Academy in Munich. He studied with several artists during this period, most significantly in Paris, Pierre Bouffay de Chavannes, who was the leading French muralist of the time and really instructed Bartlett on how to design and execute on a mural size scale. The example I show of his work here is the only thing he did in the United States, which is for the Boston Public Library. By 1900, right about the time of the fire in the church, Bartlett returned to Chicago and quickly set up a studio on the top floor of the Fine Arts Building, shown here, and his good friend Howard Van Doren Shaw designed and built out the space for him. He was in amongst a circle of very significant artists by being in the Fine Arts Building, and he was one of several who actually painted murals in the hallways on the 10th floor. This is Bartlett's work, and I always thought that this was partly autobiographical because the figure on the right is actually an artist who was in the midst of painting. So I think he's looking a little bit at commemorating himself here. His work for the church was very well documented. It was the first large project he had ever received. And this is a page from an article from House Beautiful from 1904, which talked about the series of murals that he completed for us. By the end of 1901, which is when the church reopened, it was about 20 months from the time of the fire until the church opened. He had completed the 12 large murals that surround each of the windows on the north and the south sides of the church. And here we see a couple examples in various stages of restoration. They all depict angels, some of those 175 angels that we see, praising God, making music, and showing the abundance of the harvest. But in 1901, the Tree of Life mural, as you'll see in this early photo, had not yet been done. What was in its place was a simple stenciled design that was executed in vertical strips. And this was done as kind of a placeholder until the funds could be raised in order to complete that last piece of his design. And it's interesting to note that some of that stencil work actually still survives. The stencil work went all the way behind the organ pipes. And so when Bartlett ultimately painted his mural, of course, there was no need to paint behind the pipes where nobody would ever see anything. And so you get a sense of what that space would have looked like. It's interesting to note that the repeating motif is this hourglass surrounded by angel wings. And it's actually something I have seen in other Shaw buildings. So this was clearly a design very specific to him. And the angel wings themselves, very similar to the motif we see in the chandeliers of the sanctuary, where the wings surround the light bulbs. So by the end of 1903, the Tree of Life mural had been painted into the space. The donation of Mr. Pike, who was a trustee, very prominent Chicago businessman. The mural is painted entirely onto the wall, not on canvas like we see with most of the other murals. And it's approximately 30 by 40 square feet, not counting the surround to the sides and above the mural. One of the things that's very successful about the design is how well it integrates into the architecture. You can see, for example, how the procession of angels at the top follow the line of the Tudor arch directly above it. Also, by using the pre-Raphaelite style, which emphasizes two-dimensional rather than three-dimensional depictions of figures, it respects the flat wall surface of the architecture. You can see that it's divided into three main sections, each of which we will look at now. So the lower portion of the mural, from which it derives its name, is meant to represent the Garden of Eden, and specifically the Tree of Life at center, which you see here, of course, coming from the first book of the Bible, Genesis. So you see the tree laden with fruit. Now, we often talk about the mural as being a good example of pre-Raphaelite, and it is, but it's very unique in the sense that it is Bartlett's take. Remember that by the time he painted this mural, the pre-Raphaelite movement was a little more than 50 years old. And it was one of many styles that he studied during his time in Europe. So you do not see pure pre-Raphaelite here. You see it intermixed with things like the symbolist movement, Impressionism, and that sort of thing. So Bartlett's murals really stand on their own. And for example, when you look at the tree, you see how it's a very defined symmetrical shape. The leaves are all very much the same, pointing the same direction. There is not an attempt at pure reality. It is more of a depiction of the theme. Directly above the Garden of Eden, we have the rainbow. And you can see that it mimics both the coffered wooden arch at the bottom of the screen here, and of course the Tudor arch that is directly above it. And again, here, you'll see that the rainbow is not depicted in the normal colors we expect, going from red, orange, and yellow to green, blue, indigo, and violet. But it's more symbolic of the rainbow, really just incorporating a couple of colors, as you see here. The most dramatic part of the mural, of course, is the top section, which has a procession containing a total of 21 angel figures. This is representative of the book of Revelation. So the mural really goes from the first to the last book of the Bible. And what you see here, many of the angels are depicted playing instruments. Very appropriate, of course, because the mural is directly over the organ loft and location of the organ and where the musicians will stand and sing. But in this close-up, you can see some real indications of Bartlett's style. So, for example, the figures are clearly outlined. So you see a lot of dark lines around the figures. They're elongated, so these figures are not meant to be purely realistic in terms of their size. They're actually quite tall. The wings are quite stylized. And you'll notice that there's a relatively narrow color palette used, mostly in greens and browns. Now, the center of the Tree of Life mural projects out from the wall because there's actually a chimney that runs up the middle of the wall. So in that middle section, you see this grouping of 5 angels posing with the banner that rings, "Sing forth the honor of his name, make his praise glorious." And, of course, we're seeing the mural in its current dirty state off to the right or to the left because of the way that the light hit. You get a little bit of a sense of how much more color and vibrancy we should be seeing that's just not there. The other thing that I like to point out about the mural is the use of what is known as parget. So although the murals are painted directly onto the wall, in certain areas, Bartlett would build up the plaster surface. And this was done in areas that were then normally covered in gold leaf. It would help to give these areas a little bit more of a 3-dimensional effect. This is best seen at the far left-hand side of the mural, where we have 2 angel soldiers that are almost completely clad in armor. And so you can see all of that parget work, much of it brought out in gold. But you also see it throughout the mural. For example, it's on all of the halos over the angels. And then the last part of the mural, of course, is the starry sky, which is the name of today's presentation. And here we really see the influence of Impressionism and symbolism. If you look off to the far left and right, you see the clouds, which are brown and rather oddly shaped, but again, not a sense of realism, but really bringing in these other styles. And then the sky itself, not a true sky color. So it's wonderful to see how Bartlett takes all of these different styles and works them into what is a very unique mural. So of course, Bartlett always gets a lot of the attention when we talk about the Tree of Life, but we do have a number of other craftsmen that I do want to talk about this afternoon. And the first of these is Beil and Mauch, who created our 4 wonderful heralding angels. So of course, standing on top of the organ case, we have these 4 angels. They're approximately life-size. The wingspans are about 6 feet, and they are meant to represent the 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. However, I am unable to tell you which is which. And of course, they are named for the particular instrument they are holding. You'll notice this is much longer than a traditional trumpet, and it is known as a fanfare trumpet or a herald trumpet. And so that's where they get their name. The firm of Beil and Mauch actually was a result of 2 artisans who started working together to create monumental sculptural groups at the World's Columbian Exposition, specifically for the top of the administration building. Within a year of the close of the fair, the 2 gentlemen had formed a firm, and it consisted of Karl Beil, who was from Bavaria, and before coming to America, had actually worked on elaborate sculptural work for the castles of King Ludwig II, which are still very well known to this day. The other member of the partnership was Maximilian Mauch, who was an immigrant from Austria, and actually played a big role in Chicago's art scene at the time. In 1901, the year that they are actually creating the heralding angels, Mauch is one of the founders of what is known as the Municipal Art League, and so would have been very well known in that regard. They did lots of projects, both around the city and around the country. At several of the world's fairs, even Paris. And here's two local examples. On the right, they did the pediment for the Iroquois Theater. And on the left-hand side, the very elaborate exterior of the Francis Dews House, which is on the 500 block of West Wrightwood. So it gives you a little sense of a few of the other things they were doing. Now, getting back to the heralding angels, they are actually executed as two pairs. So there are two in one format, two in the other format. And here we see, if you were looking at the angels from left to right, this is angel number 1 and number 3. And you can tell their pose because these two angels, you'll see how the right arm is far up on the trumpet and the right knee is slightly extended. We then have angels number 2 and 4, which are similar, except now the left arm is raised and the left knee is slightly extended. So what it results in is basically providing two matching pairs, one to either side of the organ loft. Here we see a couple of more detailed shots. So the angels themselves are made out of plaster, but there is a metal substructure which would be necessary to support things like the wings and whatever. Plaster would not be able to support itself on its own. So they would start by creating this metal substructure and then applying the plaster on top. But there are actually metal components that we can see. So for example, the fanfare trumpets are actually made out of metal, as are the halos. In terms of the finish, obviously they're plaster, but the idea was to make them look like they were bronze. And so there was a patinated finish that was applied to the angels to give them that appearance. Now, again, in these views, because we can alter the photographs a little bit, we brought out a little bit more of the kind of the gold bronzy detail. But right now, of course, if you stand in the sanctuary, they just read quite dark and you don't begin to appreciate the beautiful finish which was applied to them. Now, I'd also like to talk about the ornamental plaster, which was all executed by the August Zander Company. And of course, plasterers are one building trade that often tend to get overlooked because they're not seen so much as artisans, but hopefully we'll see here in the next few minutes that what they executed here was really quite spectacular. Now, of course, there's wonderful ornamental plaster throughout the sanctuary and all the work. So Mr. Zander, a German immigrant, came to Chicago in 1872. So one of many, many people in the building trades who arrived here literally just months after the Great Chicago Fire to help the city rebuild. And what we see here, for example, the top two images, these are some of the elaborate panels that he created for the face of the balcony. There's actually 5 that repeat in a very regular rhythm. And then at the bottom, we see some of Zander's work. This is the decoration of the ceiling, one of the panels. And then if you look at the framing around the panel, you'll see at each intersection these wonderful little what are known as bosses. And these are a variety of things, everything's from turtles and lizards to grotesque faces and various things. Very hard to read today because, again, very, very dirty, but originally would have been quite bright in color. Now, I mentioned plasters are not often well documented. One of the few projects we know that Zander did work on prior to coming to the church was the Mississippi State Capitol. And this is the, I believe, the Senate chamber. And you can see the wonderful plaster work running all around the room up into the dome. So it gives you a sense that not only what he was capable of doing, but also, of course, the fact that he would have had a national reputation and would have been working far outside of Chicago. He died in January of 1902, just 2 months after finishing the work at Second Presbyterian. So ours was really one of his very last projects that he personally would have overseen. So let's look at what he did here. So of course, the mural is set within this recessed arch. And along the top edge of the arch, this is in the shape of what's known as a Tudor arch. You'll notice it's not purely rounded, but it actually comes to a little bit of a point in the center. So that's a Tudor arch. But what I think is really interesting is how the arch is treated. So you think of a normal arch, which is made out of stone, and you have the pieces of stone, and then of course your mortar joints in between. Now, of course, this is all executed in plaster, so you don't have to structure it that way. But what Shaw did is he took where you would expect to see those stone joints and instead put in these brackets or medallions. So the arch is still split up, but in a very different way. And this is something we see in several elements of the chancel wall, is Shaw is really playing with traditional building elements and really taking them in a bit of a different direction. So there's 19 of these brackets in total. Again, very hard to read from the sanctuary floor because they're 40 to 50 feet above you when you're standing there. But fortunately, we do have some nice detailed photos that Martin Chung did for us a number of years ago. And what you can see is that the brackets are in 3 different designs. Each depicts grapevines, which of course is one of our ubiquitous motifs throughout the space. And the grapevine itself, not painted naturalistically, but done with gold leaf to bring out that. And they just read so dark today. You don't even begin to get the sense of how lovely these are and how they would have really shone with that gold brilliance. So this will be one of those details that I think will really surprise people because we just really don't see them. I think the most clever thing that was done with this arch is how the side was treated. So of course the arch comes around, and as it starts to go down towards the sanctuary floor, instead of simply continuing behind the angel, what it does is it suddenly turns. And I like to compare this almost to thinking of the arch as a drapery or a piece of fabric. And it starts to come down vertically, and then it is drawn back and put over like a tie back, like you would do if you had a drapery on a window. The idea is twofold. One is that it does not go behind the angel, so it does not kind of distract from that. But secondly, if you look to the left of the angel's body, you see what appear to be these blocks of stone. And so it's as though the plaster has been pulled away to reveal the actual structure. But this also is an illusion because all of what appears to be blocks of stone is in fact plaster that is scored to look like stone. And this is something we see throughout the space as well, all those arches by the windows and that sort of thing. Here we have a close-up of this detail, which is known as a volute. And you can see the wonderful foliage and detail at the center. And literally more than a century of dust just laying on top of it, waiting to be cleaned. But you know, when I look at details like this and the brackets that we saw on the arch, one of the things that really brings, for me, back to just how Shaw design is so brilliant, is the amount of attention that is given to details that are so far away from our eyes. It's not like, okay, nobody can really see it, let's not bother. Every detail is executed just as though you could stand right in front of it. So obviously, once these elements are cleaned, the colors are returned to what they should be, we'll really be able to see things in an entirely new way. So for my last section, there's 3 additional craftsmen that I want to talk about. And the first is James A. Miller and brother. Which is of particular interest to me because this is the most recent one that I have researched. Some of you would have read the article in the Friends newsletter a couple of issues back where I talked about him, but really an interesting guy. So what he is responsible for are the two very dramatic large metal screens to either side of the organ loft, which of course are there to conceal the organ pipes. So the design element for this space had to be something that was very open so that obviously sound could come through. And that's why you see there's a fabric that is actually hung behind these. The fabric's literally disintegrating. So that of course is part of the project to replace that. The screens themselves are made out of copper that are then plated with brass. So they're not solid brass. We'll see in a moment, Miller was very, very comfortable working in the medium of copper. Now, the idea for the screen itself seems to have come from a specific church in England. In 1899, there was a very similar screen installed at Holy Trinity Church, Sloane Square, which is located in London. And you can see the screen is kind of in the background right here. This church was very well known. Its creation over a number of years was very well documented and was published. Shaw, of course, very interested in English architecture, the arts and crafts movement. And we know that he spent an extended period of time in England during the summer of 1900, gathering ideas for Second Presbyterian. So it seems very likely that he would have gone to this church. This is a close-up of the screen that you see here. And keep in mind that even at this point, this church was known as the Cathedral of the Arts and Crafts Movement. It was considered just that important. And two men really figured into its design, John Dando Setting, and after his death in 1891, Henry Wilson. And so Wilson is the one that designed the screen. But I want you to look at a couple of elements. Look at the kind of the overall structure, kind of this grid structure or trellis. You'll see the little medallions at the intersections where it meets. And then, of course, you see this overarching theme of grapes. So you see the bunches of grapes and the grape leaves and that sort of thing. So keep that in mind in a moment when we go back and look at the screen at Second Press. Now, James Miller was also a local boy. He was actually born and raised in St. Charles, just west of Chicago, the son of Scottish immigrants. And he did not start out as a craftsman per se. He trained as a roofer, but specifically working with metal roofs. One of his big early projects was the skylights and metal roof sections for the auditorium building in 1889. Well, a little bit later on, he did start designing decorative objects in sheet copper for none other than Frank Lloyd Wright. And so you see some of these objects that Miller made for Wright in the picture on the right. And these are actually in Wright's studio. And there's some of his iconic pieces, the large urn and the very tall, narrow weed holder, which is right at the center. Frank Lloyd Wright, in a rare moment of praising others, actually had very nice things to say about Miller, including, quote, "He had intelligent pride in his material and a sentiment concerning it." And Wright actually said that prior to working with Miller, he really did not understand the decorative potential of sheet copper and how it could be made into various forms. So this was really a very interesting collaboration. So looking back at our screen for a moment, you can see there's three main components to the design. As we saw at the church in London, you have this very regular grid, which really gives the idea of kind of serving as a trellis. And then upon the trellis, you have all of the grapevines. And the grapevines are very curvilinear, so it helps to break up that very rigid horizontal and vertical grid. And then again, as you look at the intersection of the various parts of the trellis, you see these medallions in two different designs, one of which is the Tudor rose, which is an element that shows up in several places in the church, in the plaster, in the metalwork, and elsewhere. So they're really quite extraordinary. Not something that you see very often in church design in the United States. So it's wonderful that it did this concept worked its way over. So the next contractor is a man by the name of Willy H. Lau, who under Shaw's supervision would have created all of the lighting in the sanctuary. Now he is considered a pioneer designer in electric lighting, which of course was evolving at the time of the church rebuilding. The church had gas lighting prior to the fire, and then all electric lighting was installed afterwards. Lau worked for a number of Prairie School architects, including George Mayer and again, our friend Frank Lloyd Wright, and was actually designing light fixtures for Wright's Bradley House in Kankakee at exactly the same moment he's working on the fixtures for the church. Here we see some of Lau's work, the two what are often called menorah at either end of the pulpit, and one of our wonderful crown chandeliers. Lau also designed a number of light fixtures incorporating leaded glass, including the under balcony fixtures as we see at upper right, and then two other designs which are both in the east or back balcony of the sanctuary. So in the chancel area, we actually have an interesting variety of lights here. And so you will see three basic types. And there's been a lot of discussion as kind of what was the idea? What are these meant to represent? And I remember when I first trained as a docent, I was told that these two kind of brass filigree globes were meant to represent the sun and the moon. You can see one is larger than the other. And then the six lights in between were meant to represent the six planets that were known at the time. Well, isn't that a great story? Well, it's not true. Because I actually, one day I thought, they only knew about six planets in 1901. When did they discover the others? Well, I discovered that 8 planets were very well known by the time this was executed. So that doesn't work. But, you know, you can easily take numbers out of the Bible, you know, 6 days of creation, you rest on the 7th. The bottom line is there's no record surviving from Shaw or Willy Lau to indicate why they arrived at this particular grouping, but they're quite stunning nonetheless. Now, the two brass filigree globes that I mentioned, these were actually restored a number of years ago by our friends over at Luminel. They are very interesting fixtures. They are not the same. They're very different construction. The one on the left was actually originally a Japanese incense burner. And then they're lined with a type of paper that gives this diffused light coming through. But part of the project upcoming, of course, will be the full rewiring. They were just rewired the fixture itself, but not the wiring going up, which, as Linda said, is as old as all of these art objects we're looking at today. To either side of those, we have these candelabra, which are very simple in form. You have this brass arch supporting the horizontal bar with the 4 candles. And of course, the arch that you see in the fixture, again, represents that arch we've seen over the mural, the rainbow, the wood arch. So it's used over and over again. And then in the center, we have 3 fixtures. I'm just showing 2 of them here, which are pairs of drop lights suspended from these wonderful leaded glass panels. Now, the one that you see on the right is actually the one that's in the middle. And if you look closely, you'll see that it's just a little bit higher than the one to its left. And you'll also notice that the design is very subtly different. So if you look at the cross that is worked into the leaded glass, the lines continue straight up to the very top. If you look to this one and it's match on the other side, which we don't see, you'll see how the lines actually close up as you get to the top of the fixture there. A very subtle difference. And again, something that's really almost hard to see, but again, just that level of detail that is being worked in here. Hopefully when these are cleaned and restored, we'll be able to see that much clearer. The last craftsman that I want to talk about is the Edmunds Manufacturing Company, which was responsible for executing all of the wood carving. Now, of course, there's extensive wood carving throughout the sanctuary. I'm showing here a few of my favorite examples, the angel, There's one of these on either side of the pulpit platform next to the stairs. This wonderful depiction of a grapevine, which is actually on the underside of the beams supporting the balcony. And then the bottom image there is the end of those beams. Now, Edmonds was born in Wales, came to Chicago in 1869, so he was well established by the time of the fire. And he had a very, very successful career. He was engaged by some of the largest architects of the time in Chicago, and these would have included Louis Sullivan, who had Edmonds execute all of the wood detailing in what was originally the Schlesinger and Mayer store. We know it as the Carson Perry Scott store. And then working with Daniel Burnham, such projects as Marshall Field and Company, which you see here, and also the Field Museum, but countless bank interiors and that sort of thing. So the wood that he executed here consists of a beautiful screen. And if you look at the very bottom part of the photo, you see this very fine fretwork, which again is very reminiscent of Japanese design, which does work its way into Shaw's work. Directly above that, what is known as the crenellation. That's the term for what looks like the top of the castle there. And this provides both visual and structural support to this very fine screen. And then you have additional fine balusters up above, and then that coffered arch above that. So quite a lot going on there. The coffered arch is centered by this wonderful angel holding a banner that says, "Holy, holy, holy." Again, you really get a sense in this view of just how dusty she is. She's looking for a good foot bath, no doubt, but really beautiful detail there. And when I was looking at this up close, I couldn't help but thinking about how closely the frame of the angel mimics the frame around those brackets on the plaster arch. It's a little more curvilinear around the angel, but very much the same shape. And then if you look at the bottom of the frame to either side of the angel, those little spirals really kind of mimic those volutes we saw on the side walls. So again, it shows just how brilliant Shaw is in terms of unifying all of these details. The other major element of the wood design was the four piers, the large square piers, which serve as the plinths. So the heralding angels are standing directly on top of this. And this also forms the basic structure for the cabinets that hold the organ pipes. Here we have a close-up of the Capitol. Again, Shaw is not basing this on any type of traditional classical form. You have these half rounds cut into the top. At the center on each side, you have what's known as a Caesarly cross, this square, very symmetrical cross with these large ends to it. It's a 15th century French cross. And then directly below the capitals, you have these wonderful carved panels. And you'll notice there's a pomegranate right in the center. So our friend the pomegranate makes its appearance. And then above the panel, these series of little wood carved projections, which actually look like what are called square pyramid bolt heads. So they're normally meant to be structural, but here they're just carved into the wood, and they take the place of where we normally see dentil trim. So again, Shaw is really playing with those classical elements and turning it his own way. So that concludes the look at the last of our craftsmen, at the Tree of Life, the surrounding artistic elements, really an extraordinary assemblage of artistry from the hands of numerous craftsmen, which are awaiting preservation, returning all of these pieces to their 1901 brilliance.
Before we end, I want to talk a little bit about the conservation of the project. First question that most people ask is, why does it cost so much? So let me describe a little bit about what the conservation work entails. Step one, we erect the scaffolding. Well, the scaffolding has to go up about 65 feet high and more than that wide to reach all elements of the work that Bill has described for us. It also has to protect those 2,600 organ pipes. It's very intricate scaffolding that will take up to 3 weeks to construct. It will have 4 levels. It will be an amazing structure in and of itself. Step 2, we have to protect those organ pipes. Step 3, we'll remove those old curtains and eventually put up new ones after all the other work is done. Step 4, we'll conserve the mural, which will be the largest work to be done. We'll have to repair any of the damaged plaster that's underneath it and stabilize that. We'll clean the mural, not we, but the conservators, clean the mural, apply a removable varnish, and then there'll be in-painting of any lost paint. Step 5, repair and clean and in-paint the plaster chancel arch above the mural that Bill has talked about. Step 6, repaint the west wall and over the mural in its original color. Step 7, clean the wooden arch. Step 8, clean, repair, and in-paint the 4 life-size heralding angels. Step 9, remove the light fixtures and replace that 1901 wiring with current wiring. Then we have to clean, repair, and rewire the light fixtures. Step 10, clean, repair, and replace the missing pieces in the 2 metal organ screens. Step 11, install new acoustic curtains. Step 12, remove the scaffolding. It's estimated that all of this work will take about 4 to 5 months. Numerous conservators will work on the project, with the mural conservation being done by Parma Conservation of Chicago. With your support, this work will begin this coming September. It's a daunting plan with many moving parts, and the results are going to be dramatic. So that's our plan. That's our biggest project to date. We hope you'll come to visit the church to see the mural and all this artwork that we've discussed this afternoon with fresh eyes. It's the best way to really appreciate what a masterpiece of art and architecture Second Presbyterian is.